since the release of Vessel of Hatred, I've put over 100 hours into the SpiritBorn already. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly the best way, I think, to play the Pestilent Swarm SpiritBorn. Let's get into it. This build is awesome. This is like the Monk's Lashing Tail Kick build from Diablo 3, had a baby with a Hammered In from Diablo 2, and then that baby had a baby with the Flicker Strike from Path of Exile. You're going to plow through Nightmare Dungeons in seconds. You're going to be speed farming high-level pits, getting great experience, literally one-shot basically everything in the game, and we'll explain exactly why. And these swarms, these super OP swarms, are going to follow you along all the while. Now, a few quick caveats before we get started here. One is that there will be a max roll D4 planner down below that you can follow along with. And in that D4 planner, there will be 3 variations inside of that. There's one for pushing, which is high pit tier pushing. There'll be one for leveling before you get all the gear. And there'll be one for speed farm, which is what we're going to be doing basically 90%, 95% of the time. This will be the build. In the gameplay above, you will see us literally speed farm a pit level 85. Being able to speed farm and absolutely shred some high level pits is really, really good XP. Now, I know some of you guys probably have come to this video because recently they just nerfed the Evadeborn SpiritBorn, and maybe some of you guys are looking for a new build to play. But you're worried about maybe investing in another build because it might also get nerfed. I will say with 100% certainty, there's nothing mechanically broken about this build. It is very fast, it is very strong, but we will absolutely not see a nerf to this build. I would even assume going into the next season. Now, what is the tech here? A lot of you guys probably saw the Poison Burn build that we posted before the release of Vessel of Hatred. However, obviously, day 1 Vessel of Hatred, they took out the Frostburn gloves. They just put them back in the game today, so Poison Burn is once again playable. However, because the Frostburns were in fact removed and the proc was nerfed, I do think that this will be the best way to pay the Pestilent Swarm. And again, I put over 100 hours into this thing already, min-maxing, figuring out what the best stuff to do is. I have looked at other people's variations of the Pestilent Swarm, and I do think that this is absolutely the best way to play Pestilent Swarm. And of course, we're going to break down everything we can in this video for you guys. So, what is the tech? This whole build revolves around the idea of these Pestilent Swarms. This is a mechanic unique to the SpiritBorn. And currently, there's only 3 ways to generate Pestilent Swarms. One, from the aspect of Pestilence, which says every single time you use Stinger, you get a Pestilent Swarm, and that Pestilent Swarm lasts 100% longer. It spirals outwards. There's also the aspect of Infestation, which gives all Centipede skills a 35% chance to spawn a Pestilent Swarm, dealing up to 488 poison damage per hit, but more importantly, also causes the Pestilent Swarms to deal 100% of their base damage over 6 seconds. You can also spawn swarms from using the Ring of Writhing Moon once every 10 seconds, but that is definitely not a dependable way to spawn them. And then lastly, from the skill tree, actually, if you use the Centipede and you use a lot of dot damage, he'll basically insta-kill and execute the target that has more poison than the remaining life, and he'll spawn a Pestilent Swarm. But we're not going to be using that in this build. Other things to note about Pestilent Swarms is they have an internal cooldown, I believe, of 0.3 seconds. This is confirmed from Diablo 4 developers. So on paper, while there might be ways on the SpiritBorn to spawn loads of Pestilent Swarms in a very brief period, there is unfortunately a 0.3 internal cooldown of how often you can spawn them, which does factor into a lot of decisions we're going to be making here. There's also a cap of 15 swarms to be out at one time. The build's all about Pestilent Swarms. We're going to get them to circle around us. We're going to get them to deal our poisoning damage, our base poisoning damage over 6 seconds, and we're going to get them to follow us throughout the rift or whatever content we're farming. So again, deep diving into the skill tree here, I'm going to provide you guys with a lot of input. I've, again, play tested pretty much literally every combination you could possibly think of and how they affect the Pestilent Swarm SpiritBorn, and some hidden tech in the skill tree that we'll definitely tackle in this video. So do follow along here. Again, follow along with the max roll D4 build planner below. Okay, so first off, we're gonna put 1 point into Rock Splitter, really just to pick up Enhanced Rock Splitter. This says Rock Splitter increases your block chance by 15% for 5 seconds, and when you block, you gain 11 vigor. So that second effect there that says when you block, you gain 11 vigor is not tied to using Rock Splitter at all. Again, it's not even going to be on our skill bar. We're not going to use a basic attack. We are not about using basic attacks. They are a waste of your skill tree, but you had to put 2 points in to unlock the core section. Coming down into the core section, we're going to pick up Stinger. This deals a poison AoE and does more damage based on how many targets are hit, because we're going to pick up Rampant Stinger. If it only has 1 target, it does 40% increased damage. But instead of echoing to surrounding poison enemies, Stinger draws from each enemy hit and its primary to gain additional 10% of its base damage of 5 times. So if you're in the middle of a big juicy pack, which we aim to be pretty much all the time in this build, you're going to be in some heavier hitting stingers. Now, I will say stinger isn't the primary source of your damage. I'd say stinger's base damage is probably 15 to 20% of your damage being done here. Most of the damage is done from the Pestilent swarms, but we'll get into more of that in the temper section. But you're going to notice we're going to get this bad boy up to 23. I think we can actually get it up to 24. We just didn't hit a good Ring of Starless guys. Now, with perfect gear, you can get stinger all the way up to level 27, which I'm just 4 points short of. Don't have perfect gear. My gear is pretty darn good, but it's not perfect. So again, we're spamming this to get more Pestilent swarms because we are using the aspect of Pestilence on our weapon. This makes the stinger do up to 150% increased multiplicative damage, but more importantly, it will spawn a swarm. Coming down to the focus part of the tree, there's some big brain stuff going on here, okay? This is maybe one of the most important sections of the skill tree. So first up, we're gonna pick up Focal Point. Now, the glaive would be nice, but we actually have to use Quarterstaff here because Quarterstaffs have a 45% chance to block on their implicit stat. Focal Point will give us a 3% block damage reduction. So anytime we block, we're going to get a 3% damage reduction. That's really not all that impressive, but we just have to get this point to unlock the next. Just Apex, you deal 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, double this damage versus elite enemies. This is a 9% damage multiplier all the time and 18 damage versus elites. This will be up 100% of the time because we're using a lucky hit chance on our ring. So anytime we hit, we have a 92% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And again, this will be up 100% of the time because we hit so fast, so often. We're putting 1 point into Mirage. You get 20% increased dodge chance for an evade, which is again, kind of weird. But whenever you dodge, you gain 5% increased critical strike chance for 3 seconds. So every single time we evade, we get 5% crit. We're not relying on that. It's just a bonus. But we take that into Unrestrained Power. This bad boy can get up to level 11 if we had a perfect ring, which is 4% multiplicative damage per level. But you deal 40% increased damage while unhindered or unstoppable. We are 100% uptime on unhindered through the use of Toxic Skin. Now, Toxic Skin is really good in this build, and we're going to explain exactly why. There's some hidden tech here. So I want to showcase something here. So the Toxic Skin, something kind of strange happens when you put it up to rank 10. You'll notice immediately at rank 9, it does 90% of your weapon damage over 5 seconds. And in this case, it's 23,884. But you put one more point in to get to rank 10, and you almost double its damage. It goes from a 90% damage multiplier to a 133% damage multiplier. So getting 10 points in this thing is super, super vital. And we're going to do this through the use of our boots. We're going to get plus focus skill, and we'll explain more of that in the gearing section. So you get this bad boy up to level 10, it's going to be 133% of your damage over 7 seconds, and of course, making you unhindered for the entire duration. Now, while Toxic Skin is active, we'll have this little poison trail that will follow us, and it'll do like pretty significant poison damage. Anytime something hits us, they're going to get infected with this poison damage. And so you're going to notice a lot of the time we're standing literally right on top of the target because this Toxic Skin damage is no slouch. And the best thing about this Toxic Skin damage is it is damage you can do while you're doing other damage. So it's not like you're wasting, time casting something else when you should be casting Pestilent Swarm. You can just have this going. It's off the GCD, which is the global cooldown. So while Toxic Skin's going, you can also be casting your Stinger, which makes this OP. Plus, the effects are just great. We're also going to pick up Enhanced Toxic Skin. So while active, poisoning is increased by 100%, 450% weapon damage over 9 seconds. And then finally, Measured Toxic Skin. While Toxic Skin is active, you deal an additional 38% poison damage as critical strikes to nearby vulnerable enemies. And again, everything is going to be vulnerable because of our ring and our lucky hit chance. So every second, you just get this free poison damage over time, over 9 seconds. You also get this free poison crit. The reason also this is so good is because we are using Noxious Resonance. So this will actually trigger your crit from Noxious Resonance. You actually don't have to scale crit at all in this setup, but we do because we're using several items that actually do scale our crit. So it just kind of happens, but we generally don't need to worry about scaling crit whatsoever. But the other reason we love these boots and picking up focus skills is not only to get our Toxic Skin to rank 10, again, to get that sort of hidden damage multiplier, we're also going to be using the crap out of a skill called Ravager. Ravager is amazing in this setup. What Ravager allows us to do is basically anytime we spam Stinger, which is basically all we're spamming, we're going to teleport instantly to whatever target is in front of us or that we're targeting with Stinger. And this effect is going to see 100% uptime. So just to showcase that, we're going to activate the Ravager ability. And then anytime we attack something with Stinger, we're going to instantly teleport to them. And that's why you're going to see us flying across the screen at the speed of light, because Ravager just lets us teleport so quickly. It's amazing in this setup. So yeah, we're only going to put 1 point in Ravager, but again, because we're getting focus skills on our boots, this will increase the damage that Ravager does, which is actually no slouch in damage. It is 64% weapon damage per strike anytime we hit Stinger. It's just an additional damage bonus, and this base damage goes up by a lot. All of these skills, they're going to go up by a ton, and we'll explain why when we get to the gear section and the aspects. Now, because we're using Jack and Shell, the cooldown on the Ravager will come back basically instantly. However, Ravager has a cool effect that says kills extend the duration by 2 seconds, reduced to 0.25 seconds per kill, up to a maximum of 2 points, minimum of 0.25 seconds. So this effect will be up like bonkers. You will not have to cast it all that often, which is good because we don't really want to be casting any skill more than we have to because of Jack and Shell. It'll be draining our life if we just spam this kill ability off cooldown. We do not want to spam this ability off cooldown. We want the effect to be up at all times, but we don't want this to be spammed off cooldown. And then, of course, other than the port, we're going to get 30% vigor regeneration while Ravager is active, which is super vital for this setup. We definitely need that vigor regeneration. Coming down into the defensive part of the tree, we're going to pick up 1 point into Armored Hide, but more importantly, 1 point in Enhanced Armored Hide, which says activating Armored Hide grants you maximum resolve and increases your thorns by 400 for the duration. We don't really care about the thorns, but it gives us maximum stacks of resolve. So immediately when you jump into any content, into any rift, you can pop Armored Hide before you do any content and get yourself up to maximum resolve stacks. Again, resolve stacks just increase your damage reduction by 20% as long as you have a stack to be consumed. So if you see yourself getting low on resolve stacks, you can just pop Armored Hide and get yourself up to full. But more importantly, Armored Hide gives us a 100% chance to block, which has synergy with Rock Splitter. We'll get 11 vigor anytime we get hit, while this 100% block chance is active. But more importantly, we're going to be using a ring in our push setup, which we'll get into in the gearing section, that gives us critical strike damage per that percent chance to block, making us incredibly tanky versus any content we see. And then another really important part of the build here is ability called Scourge. We're going to be basically spamming this because of some ultimate passes we get later on. But Scourge is basically an AoE fear and slow. It does poisoning damage over 6 seconds. But also we get a 50% damage multiplier for enemies hit by Scourge, or enemies you hit while they're infected with Scourge, which is always going to be up because, again, we're spamming Scourge off cooldown, and we'll get into why in just a second. So we're going to 50% damage multiplier just from having the skill up, on top of the skill doing actually quite good damage. And we're actually going to buff this even further, which we'll get into in the aspect section. Last but not least, and probably the most important, is we're getting a 60% of your maximum vigor over 6 seconds. So this is vital to be able to spam our Stingers casts. So between the Ravager 30% and this regeneration here, and increasing your maximum vigor, which we'll do in the Paragon board, this will keep you basically full, mostly full on vigor all of the time. But 1 point into anti-venom, 50% poison res. This is actually super vital for this build because we are going to be relying on this to get our resistance cap. But just 1 point there, and then 3 points into nourishment, which increases our poisoning damage by 9% for 3 seconds anytime we heal. And we heal for literal loads in this build every second. And we'll explain why in the gearing section. Coming down into the potency section, no skills to pick up here, but super important passives. We're going to put 1 point in resilient. This gives us a 5% increased life when we hit with a gorilla skill. And because gorilla is going to be our primary spirit hall, all of our skills are gorilla skills. So this has 100% uptime. But more importantly, we're going to get dominant. Gorilla skills deal 50% increased damage to knock down enemies, and their first hits have a 5% chance to execute non-bosses. Now this execution goes off quite a bit. It is super OP, especially the higher you go in a pit. You can one-shot an elite just by looking at, just by breathing on them. But this 50% increased damage multiplier is no slouch. What it feels like, it's its own separate multiplier. You'll see that once you spec this and you try out some other skills, some passive skills in the skill tree, that this just outperforms most damage multipliers. I think it must be because it's its own separate multiplier, but it is really, really strong. And you'll see when you put it on, you'll feel it. Now, we knock down enemies quite a bit because, one, we're kind of scaling lucky. We're not directly scaling lucky, but because of some of the uniques we get, we do have a good lucky hit chance here. But we have 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies. And again, everything will be vulnerable 100% of the time. And you deal 30% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which is always up because, again, we're perma-fearing, we're perma-slowing, and those are both crowd-controlled effects. And so we'll have that 30% damage multiplier, but we'll get that 30% chance to knock down enemies, which again will give us a 15% damage multiplier. And again, it is a strong multiplier. You will definitely feel this. Now, this will not be up on bosses, sadly, but it is super, super strong. You could use those 4 points and go vigorous and balance exertion, but for me, I found it very hard to keep up the vigor cost of balance exertion, especially on bosses when you're not hitting that many targets. So I vouch for the 15% damage from Dominant. The other reason I really like Dominant is because it's 15% damage to all the damage you do. So it's like Scourge, it's Toxic Skin, it's Ravager, and it's the Swarms. Whereas if you put points into just balance exertion, it is just a Stinger. And again, balance exertion will be better for bosses, but bosses is where we sort of struggle to keep up 100% vigor. So I actually still genuinely prefer Dominant. I'll put 3 points into Potent, and we'll get additional points of Potent through our necklace slot. Potent is literally the strongest passive in the game currently. Now, if you got this fully maxed on your necklace, you get a rank 10 Potent, which would be 100% damage multiplier to basically everything, as long as you hit them with Jaguar skills. And again, we do tons of hits through the Hunter, and we do tons of hits through Ravager. So this effect will have really good uptime, and it is just really, really, really strong. Again, it's strongest passive in the game, probably. Put 3 points into Ravenous, and we're going to additional points in the Ravenous through one of our weapon tempers, and we'll explain that in just a minute. But that basically gets us a flat damage multiplier to Centipede skills. And this does affect the Swarms. I tested it myself for some reason. Even though technically the Swarms are like a proc, they count as being Centipede skills. And then additionally, we're going to Oppressive, which says your Centipede skills deal 20% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. And again, 100% uptime on crowd control through Scourge. And you get 3% increased crowd control durations, which is also good with Scourge. And we're going to juice this Ravenous up again through our temper, which we'll explain it just in a second. So we get up to a 40% damage multiplier just from this one passive alone. Now, coming into the ultimate part of the tree, which is arguably the most important for any SpiritBorn, we're going to pick up the Hunter. He's going to be our ultimate ability here, not only because he provides great mobility, but he gives us some pretty cool effects, and his uptime is pretty much insane. So this lets us bound across the battlefield, hitting once for 70% weapon damage, and then an additional 7 times for 280% weapon damage. And again, that weapon damage is going to get buffed because something we're going to explain in just a second here. And this doesn't hit like terribly hard, but it doesn't hit terribly light either. It's a pretty good way of doing damage, and it gets basically buffed by everything we do here besides these Centipede passives. But what also makes the Hunter so good is because he overfills our ferocity by 4. So he's going to give us 4 additional stacks of ferocity. And ferocity apparently is a separate attack speed multiplier. So you can stat your character up to 100% attack speed, and then every stack of ferocity you get beyond that 100% attack speed cap will actually count to give you a beyond 100% attack speed. So in this particular build, we're going to have pretty much full uptime on 145% total character attack speed, which is GG. But secondly, it'll deal 100% increased damage to injured enemies. So injured enemies is any enemy below 35% life. And this effect is so good in this setup. You'll see once mobs get to 35% or lower health, they just absolutely melt. They just delete. Finally, we're going to put a point into Exalted Hunter. Killing an enemy while the Hunter is present has a 40% chance to instantly reset its cooldown, and his chance halved after each consecutive reset. So this thing is going to pop off like nuts. You're going to spam the Hunter, you're going to kill a bunch of stuff, you're going to see the cooldown come back, you're going to do it again, you're going to do it again, and eventually it'll stop. But the cooldown of Hunter is reduced significantly in this build thanks to our gear, which again we'll explain in just a second. So Hunter will be back very often. Great mobility, great damage, great effects. But what the ultimate allows us to do is get some of these really powerful passive skills here. So one, we're going to put 3 points into Resolution. Casting an ultimate skill gives 50% damage multiplier, and double that, so 30% damage to elites for 3 seconds. So anytime we cast the Hunter, we're going to get that damage multiplier for 3 seconds. And again, because we can cast Hunter so often, this 3-second uptime has a really good uptime here. Put 1 point into Sustenance, which is just a heal while you kill, which is like whatever. It's not terrible, but it's not something we care about. But most importantly, we're going to get 3 points into this Intricacy. Upon casting an ultimate skill, the last different potency, defensive, and focus skill you cast prior is reset and can be cast for free up to 3 times in the next 5 seconds. This thing is absolutely nuts. And this is where sort of the skill rotation comes into play here. So we want to make sure anytime we cast the Hunter that Scourge is the last ability we cast before it, because that allows us to basically spam Scourge for free 3 times following the Hunter. And so you can keep rotating that. You can keep doing that. The worst thing you can do in this build is accidentally cast something like Ravager before you cast it, and then you can spam Ravager, which literally does nothing for you. So do make sure that Scourge is the last ability you cast before you cast your Hunter, because Scourge will have some serious damage potential, and on top of giving you basically full vigor all the time. We'll put 1 point to Spiritual Attunement. Your maximum vigor is increased by 10 while you have an ultimate skill equipped. We're going to have an ultimate skill equipped, so we just get 10 vigor, which is actually not a terrible thing, because again, Reinforced Scourge gives you 60% of your maximum vigor over 6 seconds. So if we have a max vigor increase, we're going to get more vigor per second from Reinforced Scourge. So maximum vigor is not a bad thing to get in this build, and we're actually going to get it here and through the Paragon just to give us better vigor regeneration. And then finally, we're going to pick up Supremacy. Any enemies you kill while an ultimate skill is active grants a stack of Supremacy, increasing your damage by 3% up to 30%. When an active skill ends, you gain 5 stacks of Supremacy, but you begin to lose 1 stack every second. So if we were able to kill stuff while the Hunter is active, which is a pretty short duration, we're going to get these stacks of Supremacy. And then when it falls off, we lose 1 every second. So this will have pretty decent uptime in the build. When you really start to push into higher pits, the viability of Supremacy sort of goes down, but you do get those 5 stacks at the end of every Supremacy regardless. So that'll be at least a 15% damage multiplier. But then lastly, the key passive, the most important part of the build, is an ability called Noxious Resonance. Your critical strikes cause your poisoning on an enemy to burst, dealing 100% of the total poisoning instantly to them, and 20% of its to surrounding enemies before removing the poison effect from the primary target. So basically, anytime we crit, all the poisoning damage on the target gets removed and explodes, dealing 100% to that target and 20% to each of the surrounding targets. So density is your friend, not only because of this Noxious Resonance, but also because Stinger gets more damage based on the amount of targets around you, up to 5. You want to surround yourself with density, and we aim to do that with the Hunter. The Hunter lets us jump into the middle of a whole pack, and you'll see in the gameplay we do that very often. But on top of this juicy effect, we get that damage is increased by 30% of our critical strike damage bonus. You can see our current bonus is somewhere in the realm of 726. We can get this up even higher if we have better gear. So critical strike damage has really great value in this build. Not only does it make, things like the Hunter and Ravager hit much harder, or the base damage of Stinger to hit much harder, but it also causes those poisons on the target to explode harder when they do pop off. So it's almost essentially like you're double dipping when you spec in the crit damage. It is really, really strong in this build. Moving on to the gear section. Again, there will be 3 gear setups in the max roll D4 planner down below. You're going to see a push variant, you're going to see a speed farm variant, and you're going to see a leveling variant. The speed farm is what we're talking about in this video. For the most part, we will talk about the push variant at the end, and the leveling is just going to be the gear you use until you're ready to do the speed farm version, because it does require 2 uniques, mythic uniques. You'll also notice in the max roll version, there is going to be one particular stat I star on every piece of gear, and sometimes it's a star and that star lines up. The star means I want you to GA that stat on that piece of gear, and then the 3 bubbles means that's what I want you to invest your master working into. Those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes you'll see something like this where I want you to GA the armor, say on the necklace, and put 2 ranks into the potent, and then 1 rank into the armored hide. But of course, if you got any of these GA, that'd be GG. But for the sake of viability, we're going to only star one thing on every piece of gear, even though even myself, I have some multiple GAs on some of my gear. So starting out with the helmet, Air of Perdition is just nutty strong in this build. It gives us ranks to core skills. And again, most of our swarm damage is based around the Stinger ability. So increasing ranks to Stinger will cause those Pestilent swarms to have increased base damage. So more ranks to core skills, the better. I was lucky enough to masterwork this 3 times, so we get +7 core skills, and I also got lucky to land crit. But the Air of Perdition lets us get a 60% damage multiplier due to its secondary effect, on top of giving us lucky and movement speed. This build, as you'll see in the gameplay, is at basically the cap of movement speed, which is a 200% cap, which is more than good enough to speed farm all content. Plus, our mobility is insane. We have 2 mobility abilities in this build between Ravager and the Jaguar, so mobility is just absolutely nuts. For the chest piece, we are using what's called the Jack and Shell. This thing is awesome. Basically, anytime we use one of our cooldowns, which basically every ability on our bar no, literally every ability on our bar is a cooldown besides Stinger. So anytime we use one of those cooldowns, we lose 10% of our life per second while they're on cooldown. But every second, they reduce their duration by 3 seconds. So you're going to see the cooldowns will come back doubly fast, triply fast than they normally would. And that is due to the Jack and Shell. However, they will drain your life like crazy. You're going to be spending vigor like crazy here. So getting this 10% life heal every single time you spend. So every single time you hit with your Stinger, you're going to be healing like nuts. And that's going to pop off so well with Temerity. Jack and Shell plus Temerity. I said it in my last video. It is like peas and carrots. It's the best combo possibly in the game currently. What I really like to GA on the chest piece is maximum life. Preferably masterwork that all 3 times. Max life is really, really important in this build. I only have a 7,300 pool. If I had a GA life on my staff, I would probably be up to like 9,000. And that's really good because a higher health pool means a higher barrier pool. We will be at 100% barrier all the time because of Temerity. So if we can just get more life, it's more barrier, which is more mitigation. We're not investing a lot into mitigation. You'll see a lot of other Stinger builds will do that, and we'll explain that sort of in the push section of this video. But I honestly feel that it's overkill. Between Jack and Shell and Temerity and just playing smart, you're going to have basically the inability to die. For gloves, just a regular pair of legendary gloves. We really want armor, attack speed, and stinger ranks. Ideally, you'd want to GA the stinger ranks, but a GA attack speed is super important here because it will bring you to that 100% attack speed cap. And armor is super necessary for the aspect on our necklace, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So again, stinger ranks are going to be super important here. Our Pestilent Swarm damage is based on those stinger hits. A lot of our Pestilent Swarm damage is based on those stinger hits, so getting ranks to stinger is really, really good. I was just trying to get this pair of gloves. This is probably my worst piece of gear. I was just trying to get these to rank 12 for the sake of the video. But there's another synergy on these pair of gloves that I really, really like with this setup. You'll see some of those other Pestilent Swarms out there on the internet. They're going to recommend you drop, maybe Toxic Skin for something like Vortex. And you'll cast Vortex and it'll suck enemies in. And that's great. Maybe they even use the boots to let you get a free Vortex once every 8 seconds. I don't really think that that's worth it. And again, we're getting a lot of damage from our boots because of the focus skill damage, and Toxic Skin is actually passively doing damage. So while Vortex is great for creating density, we only need a maximum of 5 targets around us for Stinger, and we're pretty much going to have that 100% of the time because of Jaguar and jumping into packs. So what I really, really like here is getting freeze chance on the gloves. Now, what freeze chance lets us do, again, because we are scaling lucky, but freeze chance lets us jump into a pack with Hunter and spam Scourge, and this will cause us fear. Now, fear usually makes targets run away. Luckily, they get hit with slow and fear, so they're not going to just run away really fast. But a lot of times, you're going to see in the gameplay, I'm going to Jaguar jump into the middle of a pack, and I'm spamming Scourge, and they're going to get feared, but they're also going to get frozen. And when they're frozen and feared, they can't move. So this is a really, really valuable and powerful combo in this setup because we don't really want mobs to fear and run away. And we don't really want to waste a skill slot on something like Vortex to suck the enemies back in once they're feared. So what the freeze allows us to do is keep them in place. And this thing does trigger a lot because, again, we are scaling quite a bit of lucky hit here. But what this also allows us to do is get a faster stagger on bosses. You'll see the stagger bar go up really, really fast on bosses and pits. And a large portion of that is due to this lucky hit proc chance on the gloves. So again, getting freeze on the gloves is super big brain. Really, really nice setup for this build. The other temper, of course, we're going to get critical strike damage. Critical strike damage gets us basically double dipping here through the use of Noxious Resonance. The pants, of course, we talked about already. It is peas and carrots with Jack and Shell, but this lets us, any effect we heal beyond 100% of our life gives us a barrier up to 100% of our life for 8 seconds. So we're going to get 100% barrier literally all the time because we are spamming heals on ourselves. So you're going to see we really rarely ever drop below 100% barrier. Such a strong item in this build. Ideally, you'd want to GA the maximum life roll, but damage reduction while healthy isn't too bad, but you definitely don't want to masterwork either healing received or lucky hit to heal. Again, I need to remasterwork these pants, but max life will be number 1 because, again, a bigger life pool gives us more barrier, and more barrier is more survivability. The damage reduction while healthy, it will be up most of the time, but a more reliable stat here would be maximum life. The boots Also some big brain stuff going on here. Again, the ranks to focus skills is so strong because it levels both your Ravager and your Toxic Skin. And again, it's really important to get that Toxic Skin to rank 10 because you get this hidden, basically double damage bonus from getting it to rank 10. Another really important stat on the boots is going to be armor. And again, we'll talk about armor in just a second, but you'll notice we got armor on the gloves, we have armor on the boots, and these are very important roles for the build. Very, very important. And we'll get to that in a minute. As far as the third stat goes, ideally, all res would be better than a single res. It would balance your reses a bit more because we do get good resistance from the Ring of Rising Moon. We get great resistance from Ring of Starless Skies. And we get great all res from having an Ancestral Necklace. So I think if you ran all res here instead of a single res and then put a diamond at one of these slots, you would actually be res capped all of the time. I'm currently relying on the Soothing Spices incense. So I have to make sure this is up once every 20 minutes. And that is the only way I can stay res capped in Torment 4. But that's not big of a deal. You do find yourself sitting on a lot of resources in the end game. So having 3 essences up or incenses up is not a big deal. But yeah, if we had all res on the boots, we could be pretty much solved on all res. As far as tempers here, these are very important. So 1, movement speed. You want to get the movement speed to roll here because again, that'll pretty much cap us off to be at that 200% movement speed cap. Very important to note here is getting stinger size. This makes our stinger hit a wider AoE. And the reason that's again important because stinger gets bonus damage from hitting up to 5 enemies around you. You get a 50% damage multiplier as long as there's 5 enemies around you. And now having a bigger AoE is more forgiving on that 5 enemies. And again, since we fear sometimes, that can be quite good to get a increased stinger size. So definitely get increased stinger size on gloves or boots and freeze on gloves or boots. Those are very important tempers. Forgot to talk about the temper on the gloves. Again, the gauntlet or the aspect of infestation, get that pestilent swarm lucky hit chance, but more importantly, dealing 100% of their base damage over 6 seconds. Very, very important effect. And then on the boots, we're going to get the aspect of apprehension, which gives us a up to 40% chance increased damage to feared enemies. And again, 100% uptime of the Scourge and the Fear. So a 40% damage multiplier popping off at all times and on a boot slot. Moving on to the weapon. Now, there's a lot to discuss here. 1, we want a quarterstaff because again, block chance is flat good in this setup because of the passive of Enhanced Rock Splitter. We get 11 vigor when we block, but also block is just good mitigation in and of itself. But most importantly, and something you're not going to see a lot of in the speed farm version, but the push version, we use an aspect called aspect of redirect force, which gives us increased critical strike damage equal to up to 70% of your block chance. So we'll get a 70% damage multiplier because we're going to have 100% block from using Armored Hide. But while Armored Hide is not up, which I believe all said and done here, we'll have about 4 seconds, 3 to 4 seconds of Armored Hide downtime. And we'll explain that in just a minute. We'll still get that base 45% chance to block and get at least half of the effect of the redirect force aspect, meaning 35% damage multiplier. But again, we only use this for pushing pits. 95% of content, you're never going to take off Ring of Rising Moon. But if you're really pushing high level pits, this is what we're going to recommend. And again, we'll talk about this in just a second. But with the weapon, you definitely want Dex, Max Life, and Crit. If you could GA anything here, I'd actually say the Life roll. Again, Life is super important. It's increased survivability, but more importantly, a higher life pool means a higher barrier pool for temerity. So getting a higher max life pool is very important and very juicy for surviving those high-end pits, for surviving, the Dark Citadel. Big hits. But the most important aspect would be the aspect of Pestilence here. Swinging Stinger spawns a Pestilent Swarm and its location, which deals up to 150% of Stinger's base damage. And again, we're getting Stinger up to level 27 through the skill tree. So the base damage is huge, 224%. So those swarms are going to get hit really, really hard. But they also last 100% longer and spiral outwards. That plus the aspect on our gloves is giving us that sort of hammered in feel where the swarms are spiraling around us. Now, moving on to tempers. So obviously critical strike damage is going to be a best in slot temper here. But so I sort of messed around with all of them. I've done double damage with Stinger, and it is good. It makes Stinger hit twice. If you get up to Masterwork 12, it will make it hit 77% chance for Stinger to hit twice. Now, this does good damage. This is what I tried first, It is very good. It's very comparable. Honestly, I don't know that I really noticed the difference between the two when I'm pushing higher pits, like in a pit level 100. I don't know that I felt the difference between Ravenous and Stinger double damage, but on paper, Ravenous should actually be doing maybe a little bit more damage, and we'll explain exactly why. So Stinger hitting twice is good. However, because there is an internal cooldown of how often you can spawn the swarms, you don't get double Pestilent swarms, even if your Stinger hits twice. So the double hit doesn't do anything for your Pestilent swarms. So that's a net negative of going double Stinger. But the Stinger does hit hard. It will hit hard, especially if you have density around you. But it doesn't really hit as hard as having a good Pestilent swarm. And so I've sort of swapped here to go Ravenous. Ravenous, again, is that poison damage multiplier in the tree, which gives us flat centipede multiplicative damage and then double this damage versus healthy. Now, the reason I kind of like this is, one, it makes it so you guaranteed basically one-shot everything in Torment 4 because you get that double damage versus healthy enemies. So that's a nice effect. But it does increase all centipede damage. So again, we are using 3 different centipede skills here. We're using Toxic Skin, we're using Scourge, and we are also using Stinger. And so it'll give basically a flat, huge multiplier to all 3 of those. And so that's sort of why I've decided to go that route instead of the Stinger double hit. But again, I'm not sure that I felt the difference that much. But I will say on paper, Ravenous does look better. So bear that in mind when you're trying to get a GG weapon. Now, probably the second most important slot other than the weapon would be your amulet. On your amulet, we roll an aspect called Unyielding Hits, which is partially what this build revolves around. So this says casting a gorilla skill increases your weapon by up to 45% of your armor for 3 seconds, up to a maximum of 1,500 weapon damage. So it just adds 1,500 weapon damage to you. Now, because gorilla is our main aspect, all of our skills are gorilla skills. So you'll see, as soon as I hit with something, my attack power skyrockets through the roof because my armor is really, really high. And why that's so good is because it literally makes everything we have hit harder. It's going to make the base damage of our poisons go up. It's going to make our hunter hit harder. It's going to make our, Ravager procs hit harder. It's going to make our Toxic Skin hit harder. It's going to make literally everything we do hit harder. The reason I put this on the necklace slot is because the amount of armor you need to fully min-max this goes down. So if I had a perfect gorilla imprint, a perfect unyielding hits imprint on my necklace, and a GA armor roll on the necklace, not even GA on the gloves or the boots, I would be at 3,100 armor, which is just enough to get the maximum effect, get that 1,500 weapon damage, maximum weapon damage you could possibly get from this aspect, which again is super duper strong, like really, really strong. Now, because we have uniques in so many slots, increasing our army value is a little difficult here. I've seen some Stinger builds out there where they drop temerities to run a secondary parry pants, and then they run like Earthen Bulwark through their runes to get some barrier, but it just does not have the potential that these two have. So I really recommend getting the unyielding hits on your necklace. Now, because I have 38%, I need my armor to get up to 3,900 to get the full effect from unyielding hits, which for me is as easy as putting on my incense. So I get to 4,000 armor. You can get 400 armor from just incense alone. Soothing Spices gives you 150 armor, and the Song of the Mountain gives you 200 armor. And that gets me up to that 4,000. I only need 3,900 to get the full potential from this necklace, which I get through my incense. Now, if I could get a GA armor roll on gloves, if I could get a GA armor roll on pants or on boots, and a GA armor roll on the necklace, I could potentially move this effect to a ring, which would be nice for when I push. But for this setup, this is what we're going to recommend for the speed farming gear. We're going to want this on your necklace. It is so good. The hits here are really important as well. Ideally, you'd want a GA armor. You definitely want a GA potent if you can. So you could potentially get potent up to level 5. And with GA, you can get that up to 6. Every rank we get the potent is a flat 10% damage multiplier. But I'm actually going to recommend you get 1 point into a temper here and try to max that temper out to get Armored Hide active duration. If we hit the max, if we're rank 12 and we hit the max roll, we'd be at a 58% Armored Hide active duration, which is about 5 to 6 seconds of downtime on Armored Hide. And again, this is good because when we push, we're going to put this ring on. So this ring lets us use the redirected force, and we gain our critical strike damage equal to 70%, up to 70% of our block chance. But when we block, we also basically double this for 10 seconds. So you get a ton of value from this particular ring. So naturally, Armored Hide gives us 100% block chance. So that gives us the most damage possible from having a higher uptime on Armored Hide. So if we masterwork this one time, it gets up to 70, almost to 70%, which I believe only gets us down to about 2, maybe 3 seconds of downtime at the cost of a 10% damage multiplier from Potent. I do believe that this sort of balances out, but ideally you probably want to GA and masterwork fully on Potent. But if you land Armored Hide one time, it's going to be also very, very good for pushing. For everything else in the world, in the content, you just probably want Potent GA masterworked. For the final roll here, we would prefer a flat dexterity roll. This thing is really good, especially in the late game, because you can see if we turn this off and on, we're like 1600 dex, and it's 300 dex alone, which is just an insane amount of skill damage. And if you were lucky enough to GA that, oh my God, GG's. It's another 100, 200 on top of that. But, you know, something like this will be very, very rare, very, very hard to get. This is the best I've come up with. I get a GA armor roll, and I was able to spam roll Potent. And then, you know, max life isn't terrible, again, because max life is, you know, more defense, but a dexterity roll will be insane amounts of damage. For those tempers, again, Armored Hide duration, very important for when we push. Armored Hide duration will not have much effect when we're speed farming. It's not terrible. It's not going to be the worst thing ever, but super not needed. But our Hunter cooldown reduction is our other temper of choice. That just gives us better uptime when we don't reset Hunter procs via our passive skill tree. We're going to do the same thing on the ring. So on the ring, when we run the ring for pushing, we're going to roll this. We're going to have a max life, attack speed, and a lucky hit chance to make vulnerable, to basically replace Ring of Writhing Moon, but just for pushing again. And then on the ring, we can roll critical strike damage and Hunter cooldown reduction again. So getting up to basically a 50% Hunter cooldown reduction roll between these two slots. And you will have to play around resistances based on what you land here. So do keep that in mind. Look at your stat sheet when you swap these rings out. Make sure you account for that. Our other ring will be Ring of Starless Skies. We got extremely lucky here and landed the 3 GA Ring of Starless Skies. Of course, we'd like to hit a core skill 3 times, but we hit lucky once, which again, it's not the worst thing in the world to hit lucky. Also hitting that attack speed roll is really nice because it gets us at that 100% attack speed cap. But more importantly, spending primary resource reduces our resource cost, which is great. Better stinger uptime, but also gives us a flat 50% damage across the board. And this does affect our Pestilent swarms, which is really the most thing that we care about in this build. And then last but not least, a ring that we're going to be wearing most of the time. Like I said, pushing, you'll put on this special ring you're going to have just on you or in the bank for when you push. But for 95% of content, we're wearing Ring of the Writhing Moon. This ring is absolutely insane. This makes it so the stingers or the swarms come with you. And again, the swarms are our primary damage dealer. So having them come with you while you're farming content is so strong. But the stats on it are no slouch either. It gives us a, up to 44% movement speed if it's GA'd, up to 15% chance to crit if it's GA'd. But what we'd really like to hear is that unrestrained power. Unrestrained power is a flat 4% damage multiplier per rank. And if we perfectly landed that, it would be a +8 to unrestrained power, which would be a 32% damage multiplier just from wearing this ring. You could also GA the lucky chance of vuln, just better uptime. But even without it, you'll see that you have pretty much full uptime on vulnerable. But this ring is so good in this setup. It also has really great resistances. So between the Paragon board and getting 1 res on the boots and wearing this ring, and then, maybe focusing 2 reses on your necklace and your Ring of Starless Skies, you're going to get easy 70% cap on all your res wearing the ring or the Incense of Soothing Spices. So that allows us to get a skull into our armor or into our jewelry slot, which gives us 240 armor, which again is going to help us hit that currently for this character, a 3,900 armor cap to get the full benefit of unyielding hits. Now for runes, a bit unconventional here. You're going to see a lot of SpiritBorn walking around with the Earthen Bulwark from the Druid, which gives you some pretty good barrier uptime. But again, we just don't need it. Well, you're going to run at Jack and Shell and Temerity. So this lets us focus our rune slots on something a bit better investment for this particular build. So in the helmet, we're going to do a Tam Watt. So anytime we cast a non-channel horror skill, we're going to get 25 offering. And at 100 offering, we're going to get a Necromancer Decrepify, which is a flat, I believe, 20% DR, which is great because we don't have a lot of sources of DR in this setup. So everything's going to be cursed with 100% uptime and CC'd, which again, we get a 30% damage multiplier if enemies are CC'd. But it also lets us execute them. So at 10% health, they instantly die, which is really, really strong, actually. Also, more importantly, within the weapon, we're going to use Zoltal. So anytime we invoke a skill from another class, which is our Necromancer's Curse, we're going to get 150 offering, which basically gives us a free Pestilent Swarm all the time. And this just helps us stay at a 15 Pestilent Swarm cap, which gives us a 30% damage multiplier. But also the Pestilent Swarms that come from the runes are actually, they hit for 300% weapon damage. Now the swarms that come from the runes will actually hit almost as hard as our Stinger Swarms. So our Stinger Swarms are going to come out and they're going to hit for, I believe if we had max rank here, our Stinger Swarms will hit for a base of 250% weapon damage on top of a 150% damage multiplier from the aspect. So those are going to be our hardest hitting ones, but these rune ones will come up and they'll do 300% weapon damage as their base, which also benefits from the unyielding hits aspect. Without running the runes, I found myself sort of hovering in the 12 to 13 swarms range. With the rune, I found it pretty easy to keep up 15 swarms at all times. So personally, I prefer running the swarms and the weapons. You could also vouch for the Barbarian Warcry that would give a flat 15% damage multiplier, but the uptime wouldn't be as good as these swarms. What I also really like to do is when I'm running Torment, I like to run Bach rune with the Stinger rune because that just lets me have Stinger swarms as I'm moving. So just moving throughout the world will generate these swarms. And again, these swarms hit hard. It's what our whole build revolves around. So just being able to have like 2 swarms up all the time is kind of nice. For the Spirit Hall, again, we went Gorilla. So many uses for the Gorilla as our primary Spirit Hall through the passive skill tree, which we talked about already in this video. But the second Spirit Hall is the Jaguar. We recently learned that Ferocity, again, is separate from the attack speed cap of your character. So any stack of Ferocity you can get is great. So this gives us an additional stack of the base of 4. So it gives us 5 stacks. And then we get another 4 stacks from using the Hunter. So we get 9 stacks of Ferocity pretty much all the time, which is a 45% attack speed on top of our normal 100%. For Mercenaries, we actually really, really like Rahir for this particular build. And I'll tell you exactly why. One, and most importantly, he gets a 15% increased armor, which again, we talked about because of that unyielding hits aspect. Armor is really, really good with this build. So he just helps us get up to those values that we need to get that full 1500 damage bonus. But more importantly, you're going to notice a lot of the times in the gameplay above, I'm at 100% fortify. And because of this ability alone, right here bashes enemies with a tower shield, dealing 80% physical damage and fortifying you for 5% of your maximum life. He does this every 11 seconds. And so over time, he'll sort of fortify you to 100% of your life. And this, as far as I know, is one of the only ways to get fortify on a SpiritBorn. So this is actually quite nice. You get a 10% damage reduction on top of getting 50% increased armor to hit that gorilla aspect. He will also taunt enemies, which is great because it's enemies that are going to be damaging him instead of you. And you get up a 20% damage reduction for every enemy hit, up to 20%. But more importantly, you get a flat 15% increased damage multiplier to those enemies he taunted. And then I really like Variana for the secondary. You sort of get an on-demand knockdown, which is really great to pair with your Hunter. For that first time you jump on top of an elite pack, it'll make sure they get knocked down. And then when you fear them, they can't run away because they're knocked down. This is really, really good synergy. Plus you get that 30% increased damage multiplier, plus another 15% damage multiplier through our skill tree. So quite a good and potent combination for the Mercenaries. For the Paragon, there is a lot here with the Paragon. There's some choices I really like at the beginning, and there's some choices I think will fall off and get replaced once you get certain stats. But first up on the starter board, Fitness is a very strong starting board. It gives you 3 vigor when you crit, which can really help with that early game vigor regeneration. It can be really, really beneficial. On top of, it gives you crit strike damage, which again is very, very strong in this setup. I will say that once you get a dexterity roll on your necklace, so if you had something like this necklace, where you get potent armor and dexterity, you would 100% swap the fitness rune for the headhunter rune, because this will give you a ton of dexterity, which you can multiply with the amulet, which will be all around more damage, I think, for the build overall. So do keep that in mind as you sort of get better gear. You're going to want to probably level up a headhunter as well. But for most situations, fitness will be quite good here to start with. The board you're going to want to take second, because of the secondary bonuses, is definitely going to be the sapping board. The sapping board will give you, I think 6 all res if you have the secondary bonuses active. On top of giving you a pretty hefty amount of maximum resource. We've dropped a little bit here, but in our full skill tree, we definitely want to pick up these max resource nodes, because again, those max resource nodes are going to give us better uptime on our stinger, especially spamming versus bosses. But do follow along with the max roll guide below. We're not going to sort of deep dive into every point here, but we're going to want to pick up these max life, all res, and armor nodes. Get everything you can here. This would be super vital for your build, so you don't have to waste a lot of stats on your gear for this stuff. I do like the consumption here, because there is a universe where you don't need to pick up the max resource, so you can skip all of this section altogether. And while this is a really good dex board, it is also a very strong int board, and the dex board will require you to sort of pick these up and spec all these points out, whereas the int sort of lets you to come in to this part of the board and get everything you need and get the heck out. So consumption lets us, get more Pestilent Swarm damage, a flat 10.4 multiplicative damage to poison, and more importantly, a 2% increased damage for each active Pestilent Swarm. And again, this will be a 30% damage multiplier most of the times we're going to have 15 swarms active. The third board I like to get is Convergence. Convergence isn't quite as good without, obviously, the Frostburn gloves on. We're only going to get a 20% damage multiplier from running this board, because all we're investing in is in poison damage on our skill tree, on our stat sheet. We're not stacking any other damage type. And I do have confirmation from the Diablo 4 developers that even if you scale non-physical to really good values and say get like 300% cold, it doesn't count towards Convergence. It has to be that flat elemental. You have to build a second elemental altogether, which was why the Frostburns were so good in this setup previously. Now, one thing with this board, you do want to pick up all these nodes. That's why we're picking it third, because the secondary bonuses are good. You're going to get 4% increased life. You're going to get another 3% all res, another 20% non-physical, 20% non-physical, which does scale our poison damage. But early on, just coming in here and leveling a canny rune until you're really honestly probably 390 Paragon and above is really GG, because this comes in, you get an 83% additive non-physical damage bonus, a 10.4 damage multi, and you don't have to vest anything in it. So you can save these points to sort of spec out the rest of your tree. Now, when you're sort of done and you have more Paragon points, I'm going to recommend you switch out this rune for something like Fester, because Fester will give us a 5% damage multiplier even more on top of what the canny will give you. So if you eventually get the points to fill out this whole board, Fester will definitely be the way. But canny sort of lets you come in and just pick up what you need and get the heck out, so you can spend those points elsewhere. So very, very strong to be canny early, and then probably once you're Paragon 390 or above, you can switch to something like Fester. The fourth board would be Vicious Shield. Very important board for this build as well. This gives us basically a 30% damage multiplier for every bit of max life we have as barrier. And again, we're using Temerity, so we're going to have 100% barrier pretty much all of the time, which is another reason I really like running Temerity over the Bulwark. The Bulwark will not get you at 100% barrier with 100% uptime. So this will always be up, basically. And on this board, we really like Spirit. You get 110 points of dexterity, which is really nutty on this board. So that's up to 489.3 critical strike damage if you get every point of dex in here, which we definitely do. We also come over here and we pick up these little lightning res nodes, and gets us a little bit of lucky as well. These lightning res nodes are actually going to be very essential to sort of res capping ourselves if we don't land all res on boots. If we just pick one singular res, between the ring giving us lightning res and getting some lightning res on the tree, which we get it in 2 places, over here and over here. That gets us up to 60% lightning res. And then all we need is a soothing spices incense to get up to res cap on world tier 4. Or these points are going to be super important. We also like coming down here, we get a 45% critical strike damage bonus. Wait, no, 60% critical strike damage bonus just from picking up these 4 points, which is even more crit, which is great. And coming up here, getting these armor rolls are going to be really important to help you get to that armor cap. And last week, we go into the revealing board. It's a 30% lucky hit to knock down vulnerable enemies and a 30% increased damage to crowd controlled enemies, which is basically up all the time unless it becomes unstoppable or it's a boss. And on this board, Bane is the most important glyph we probably have. This gives us a flat, 10.4 damage multiplier to poison. It gives us 16.7 poison damage additive per node. The strength is actually good because it gives us armor and crit. But the additional bonus is poisoning effects have a 15% chance to deal double the amount of damage over the duration. This stacks with noxious resonance. This is calculated at the time of the damage being dealt. So you can proc this 50% damage at the start of your poison, and then it can immediately crit off with noxious resonance and crit for that extra bonus 15% damage. So very, very strong. And this is all centipede and poison skills. So your toxic skin, your scourge, your stinger, all will proc this effect. Very, very good. This is a great strength board as well, allowing to get us up to 230% additive poison damage, which is very important, again, because of convergence. The higher we get our poison roll, the more damage we're going to get from convergence. On this tree, we also like to pick up this little bit of lightning res and lucky hit chance over here. Again, lucky is very good, but more importantly, lightning res is needed in this setup to hit the armor or to hit the all res cap. We actually do need these couple points into poison res also to hit the poison res cap. We do get 15% poison from the tree and get another 10% here. So between that and our gear, we will be at 60% poison res, I think 65% poison res. And so you just put on soothing spices and you'll be at all res cap. And of course, these armor and life nodes here are super important. Armor, again, is very important because of the necklace, and life is obviously very important because of barrier. I will say that basically all 400 points of a SpiritBorn Paragon is very, very good. So the value of getting high Paragon on a SpiritBorn is probably better than most classes. It's definitely better than Necro. Lastly, I did want to talk about pushing on this build just a little bit. Again, we're going to have this ring basically ready to go to replace Ring of Writhing Moon. This will give us that crit damage based on our block chance, and we are sort of half specking for this block chance so that we can swap this ring anytime we want. It does make the build a bit more spammy because we're going to be spamming Armored Hide off of cooldown, but it'll be worth it. That damage you get from Armored Hide is actually insane. But another couple things I like to swap out when I'm pushing is I'll swap this Measured Ravager and pick up Replenishing Ravager. So this lets us hit elites up to 4 additional times with that base, 64% weapon damage, which again gets scaled from our necklace and the armor high bonus. So you'll notice this thing actually procs really, really well. And basically I have 100% uptime because again, we heal like actually crazy. So this will give us better boss damage, better elite damage, but at the cost of sort of losing mobility in those higher pits. But really in higher pits, you're sort of just gathering mobs together and you're sort of just spamming all your skills on them. This build won't really die. You'll just be sitting there tanking everything. So you're just going to be in this huge crowd of mobs, just like spamming Stinger, waiting for mobs to die. And it's really not very challenging or exciting for that matter. But that's how the push build works in the current version of Diablo 4. But yeah, for all of the content, Measured Ravager, GG, and Writhing Moon, GG. But for those push setups, swap those skills out. You're going to see a lot of success, a lot of damage. But that's pretty much going to do it for this video. This build has been an absolute delight to play. I will probably continue to really optimize the crap out of this build. You can check me out playing this live most days on Twitch. It's twitch.tv Lord_Fluffy. So do come hang out, ask your questions. You can ask your questions in the comment section below. We usually do a pretty good job of answering those as fast as we can. But I do hope you guys really enjoy this build. I have definitely enjoyed it myself. It is super fast, super fun, very efficient at farming World Tier 4 and getting those Masterwork mats and pushing higher pits, getting your glyphs leveled. It's just GG. If you guys liked the video, do give it a thumbs up. And as always, like, subscribe, come over to Twitch, ask your questions. We love you guys. Peace out.